time.
Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Saturday, which means it's time for another Seamless Live, this time with a guest. Yay, because it's been forever since I've had one, and today I have Evoke.
Hello, I'm Evoke. I am a neuropop singer, songwriter, producer, sound designer guy with a YouTube channel, and you should check me out right
He is
now
indeed a guy
here.
with a YouTube channel. In fact, if I point in the correct direction, which I can because the window's inversed, then you can see I'm pointing kind of at it. It's like underneath his thing. You can see it. It's fine. It's obvious. Um, so before we get along, I want to ask an important question about you as a producer.
Yes.
Why are you in your kitchen?
Why am I in my kitchen? Um, well, this is actually my studio just flooded the other day for the second time this year, and it just rained really hard here in Boulder, like inch and a half an hour for I guess 2 hours. And my window well, like on the outside, is not connected to the wall of my house, and the water basically just came straight in the window, and it just soaked the carpet in my studio. So we kind of ran in a frenzy, moved all the gear upstairs, and I am set up in my kitchen.
Okay, well that's terrifying.
Yes,
That's
but all the gear is fine, which is awesome.
that's good. That's very good. Okay, so the next question I want to ask is, what? How would you define neuropop?
Um, it's kind of a specific thing for me. It's not. I'm not trying to like make a genre or anything like that because I think that that has all sorts of implications that would mean it would be like classified and stuff like that. But for me, it's just like I'm trying to use all my skill sets. I'm trying to like design the sounds that I like designing, use the drums that I like using, and then also sing and write songs, which I like doing. So it's really just for me to be able to put everything I've got into all my tracks. But I mean, if people wanted to take that and run with it,
I would certainly like it. I mean, especially if it meant that neuro got more into the actual mainstream instead of just the EDM mainstream, which is not really that mainstream if you think about it.
right?
That would be pretty cool because I like neuro. It's a lot of fun. So Evoke, how was that? How was that? How did you arrive at that name?
Um, it was kind of sudden. It ended up just being a frequent message to me, and we were just talking, and like, uh, I used to be called Alias, Alius, and there was already, I know a lot of people know about other Alias, Aylius, and then it turns out on Beatport there was another alias that was Alius. So I was like, that's not going to work. Like, I can either try to compete with two people, one of whom is like Alias, Aylius. He's like a really cool guy who's been really awesome to me, and I was just not trying to like make that a competition. So I had to come up with a new name, and we were just brainstorming, throwing words back and forth. And I said Evoke, and I went to look it up on Beatport, and I was like, "There's no fucking way that Evoke is not taken." And it turns out it was not taken.
That's good. That's handy. That's not something that happens very often for words that are actually words.
Right. Especially one like Evoke. Like, how is a musician not taking the name Evoke?
I feel like they must have all had that same train of thought. It's been like, yeah, that's taken. That has to be taken. Like even the first
Right.
person who thought
I
of
mean,
it was
there's a
like,
Gabriel Evoke, and there's an Evoken. I don't even know how that's pronounced, but it's Evoken. But there's just no straight up
Evoken.
Evoke.
Evoken. That's kind of a cool name. Kind
Mhm.
of
I think they're a
remind.
metal band actually, or something.
That's badass. That is. I appreciate the imagery. All right. Someone in the chat has asked, "Where are you from?" And I guess you mentioned
I
Boulder, but that's
am from Boulder, Colorado,
yeah.
which is in the United States of America.
Represent.
I do. I represent.
Doesn't
So
mean
is Frequent, so is Spectric, so is Dino Safari,
Diamond's fair.
and Next to Blue by extension.
You got a couple. You got a couple of good guys come out of there.
We got a good crowd locally.
All right. Pinko Live One has asked, "How long did it take you to film the video word surround?"
Oh yeah, for the music video, which is up on YouTube, if you just look up Evoke, Word Surround, Simplify, uh, it took a weekend. We basically flew out to Vegas and shot the whole thing over the course of about 3 days, and then flew back.
You flew out to Vegas to record that? Huh.
You know, for the lake in the desert.
I have watched that video, but I didn't. I'm not as familiar with geography as I suppose I should be.
Yeah,
Are
it's
you?
it was an interesting choice of location, but it ended up working out. There was actually a huge dust storm at that lake. We were just taking down all the equipment, and just tons of wind started blowing at us. It had to be going like 30, 40 miles per hour because it was raining. But my first thought was not it's raining. It was like this wind is blowing the lake at me.
Wow, that could have been cool to
Ended
record
up
then.
knocking over our light thing, which had like sandbags on it. It
Wow,
was brutal.
that does sound interesting. You have a lot of interesting weather events in your life.
I do. I think that water from the sky tends not to like me.
True fact. So let's talk about your productions a little bit. You
Yes,
you use Ableton Live.
I do.
You do. What? I actually am not terribly familiar with Ableton Live, but I'm just going to ask what are your favorite VSTs? Someone else just asked that in the chat. But what are your favorite plugins and stuff? Like, what do you use to produce?
Um, Typically for production, I use the only VSTs that I really use are Massive and then sometimes Fab Filter Pro L, which is just a limiter. That's my mastering process, is that I just slam it like 12 dB into a limiter and call it a day.
I approve.
But most of the stuff I do is just Ableton stock stuff. I don't really use pretty much any VSTs, actually.
Cool. I can appreciate that. Someone just asked, what are your favorite built-in plugins in Ableton?
Operator and sampler, definitely. And then it's less about kind of like what the plugins are. What I like about Ableton is that you can kind of route things the way that you want. So like I can have like a lot of people know about frequency splitting. It's like you take everything below 200 hertz and that's one chain of audio, and then parallel to that you have 200 to 1500 and then 1500 all the way up. So you can kind of have three separate chains, but you can do that with almost anything. So it's kind of like I can have one, like I have these filters. I explain a lot probably better in my YouTube videos, but I have like filters that move like the selection move. It's like frequency splitting, but the middle bit shifts as you modulate a macro. So I can put an effect like in this band that's sweeping across the frequency spectrum.
That's a really cool idea.
Yeah, so that's what's cool about Ableton is you can kind of like modulate cutoff points and have like theoretically infinite amounts of parallel chains and all sorts of shit.
It does sound badass.
So
So
90% of it is just routing.
yeah. So you mentioned Frequent earlier. You
Hmm.
you and him run the label Upscale Recordings,
Yes,
right?
we do.
And how did that happen?
Product placement. Um, how did that happen? We were talking, and at the risk of naming names, I'm just going to say that we were kind of talking about where we would want to release NeuroHop tracks, and we decided that all of the avenues that were available were not necessarily the way we wanted to go because maybe of the way that they were treating their artists, or maybe because of the nature of their contracts, or because of some of the controversy or the kind of people that they were signing. And at the moment, I'm trying to remember what the name of that label was. It was one that was going to start up, and it had this Cursa and Dusky thing. I remember that the Proto Star Disprove collab was originally going to be released there. I think it started with an F, but they just shut down. So Nolan and I were like, well, why don't we make a label? So we messaged Corey that day, and we're like, we want to make a neuro label. Corey is from Adapted, and he was down with the idea. Spectric is my roommate, so we just asked him to make the art. He does a lot of really cool designs at specvisual.com, I think is his website.
Spec Visual.
So it all just came together again in like a day, kind of unexpectedly.
That's pretty cool. That kind of stuff works. Let's see. Someone just asked, when you work on an EP or album, do you work on one song individually or do you work on multiple songs at one time?
I work on a lot of songs at once. Like I think, what day is today? Saturday. So between Friday and Thursday, I worked on 5 songs between those 2 days because Friday, Spectric and I sat down and did a collab in about 8 hours, and then after that, I started working on a collab that I was working on with who is it? Tasha Baxter, and
Oh,
then I woke up this morning, worked on another new collab with Pusher that I'm starting, and then did some mixing on something I'm doing with Laura Brem, and then I made a new bass patch. So I work on like 4 or 5 things at a time.
those are some good vocalists to work with, Laura
Yeah.
and Tasha. Tasha, I think, has to be my favorite out of the current group of vocalists that
She's
exist.
awesome. And the song we're working on, I'm like blown away by how good she has, how well she's done with it. It's really coming along nicely. And so is the Laura Brem collab. It was actually cool because I got to meet up with her in person. She lives about 30-minute drive from here. So we met up and we wrote the entire song, like start to finish in person together. Like we did the songwriting, we did the chords, we produced the whole track basically, or at least a rough draft of it in person.
That's pretty cool. See, that's
Yeah.
actually something else that I like in particular about you is that you incorporate vocal stylings in your crazy bass music, which is something that doesn't happen terribly often. It also doesn't usually happen where it's the same person who does it. Like I find it interesting that you have your own your own vocals on your
I
tracks.
really like recording my own vocals. It's I don't know, it's I've been singing since I was like 7 on and off, and then for a while in high school I was like smoking and doing all sorts of other stupid drug related shit. So it kind of fell off for a while, and then recently I just kind of went in to check out microphones, and they offered me this Rode NT-1A, which someone recognized that earlier. Props to you. And they gave it to me for like $200, like with the pop filter, with the mic stand, with a guitar cable, and a year warranty. I was like, fucking deal, dude.
That's pretty good. Let's see. Someone has been asking repeatedly, how do you make your badass snares?
For my snares, and this is another thing where I like Ableton's routing options. I usually have like one MIDI clip set up to trigger multiple different samples. So the first one is generally a transient, and then the second one is generally the tail, and then the third one is a high-end clap or something to that effect. So it's like I basically have the transient, which is like really poppy, like neuro pitched up snare, and then I have the tail, which is like a sort of beefier dubstep snare, which has like an attack envelope on it. And normally, like, there's the attack envelope that's like this really straight up, but I have one that's more like that, so that it's like this space is completely reserved for the transient. And same with the clap, I have another thing like that. So the first like 30 milliseconds of the snare is specifically just the transient. And then, yeah, short attack, but long release actually because it's the tail of the snare.
That works. That's pretty good.
So it's
Someone
like being able to do the transient, the tail, and the high end separately is really helpful. That's how I've been able to kind of get what I've been happy with recently.
Yes, snare layering and the kick layering as well. Basically, any kind of layering has been pretty popular for kind of a while. But what I think, like what I've noticed, like I didn't used to do a whole bunch of it, but now I do. But it's not so much like I guess what I would call it is like horizontal layering is what kind of what you're doing. Because like if we're gonna define like vertical layering as being just you just put three different snares together, and like everything that is all three of those snares are all happening at the same time. Versus horizontal layering where you're taking like you have like the beginning of the attack, and you have one that's the tail, and then one that's like a clap that kind of goes on. It's like a combination of the two, and that works for lots of things. Also for like kicks and
Yeah, I think it's really important with kicks and snares, and it also helps with side chaining a lot because if you do, for example, if you do the snare transient separately, you can have your side chaining specifically to the snare's transient rather than to the whole snare, and you can do like just like a really huge, like immense, like 11 decibel duck, but it only happens during the transient.
right, that
So
must help in
like,
mixing quite a bit, especially indeed. Let's see. Check out S layer for layering. Someone says I've never actually used that, but I've seen it mentioned. How often do you utilize volume automation on your bass sounds?
um, it kind of depends. I've been doing less volume automation lately. I mostly do volume automation on sort of like synths, chops, etc. But I've been doing a lot less of it since I stopped working in audio pretty much at all. And I'm gonna talk about gain staging in just a second, promise. But what was I saying? Words, most likely.
He was saying words, ladies and gentlemen.
Do you remember what I was talking about at all?
I was actually reading the chat as well, so it's kind of like I was trying to remember questions to ask you. What were we just talking about? Can someone remind us? Because I don't remember. Um, let's see. We were talking about snares and transients and bass automation, volume automation.
Bass automation, volume. I'm doing more low passing lately because it messes less with the low end. Like I try to keep my subs pretty constant and stuff like that so that it's possible to really keep the low end controlled. But I've been doing low passing because it works effectively the same as volume automation when you're talking about bass sound design.
That's kind of true if you think about, like, especially if you're not like, I really hate on basses that have a high resonance low pass, like the ringy kind of like sound that creates doesn't really fit well. So
Hmm.
like, but if you take away the resonance, it basically becomes volume automation at that point. Like it just
Hmm.
sounds like the same. It's just doing regular volume automation. And
And
like I
then if you want to
remember,
make it volume automation, you can just high pass it. You can high
exactly.
pass the low pass,
There you
and that
go. Yeah.
becomes volume automation.
Or yeah, and like if you listen to a lot of Spore recordings, old Spore stuff, like that's pretty prevalent, like just regular volume automation
Hmm.
versus something like low passing or band passing. All the band passing is certainly involved, just not at that stage.
Right. So gain staging. I'm
Gain
going to talk
staging.
about it because
Let's
it's
do
been
that.
mentioned, and there's someone who's very vigilant about it, which I respect. Um, Basically, for me, what gain staging mostly is setting up the track from step one to really sound good. So, for example, when I'm making my kick sample and I'm layering, I know that I want my kick to hit at -6, which there's actual values in Ableton that show you where it's hitting rather than it's easy to get confused because you can see how much you're adjusting it by, but there's actually a little value down here that shows what it actually is hitting at. So you can check like my kick is hitting at -6 decibels, and that's where I want to go. So if I'm layering a kick with a hat sample, which is what I usually do to give it high end, I want to make sure that the combination of the two doesn't reach above -6. And then I do the same thing with my snares, layering the transient, the tail, and the clap to never go above -6. And that's why getting that attack envelope to look like that is really important because it doesn't stack the transient with the transient from your tail. And it makes it so you can hit that -6 decibels without doing absurd compression, without having too much just noise in the
Mm.
sample. So you can have a really pronounced transient initially. So getting the kick and the snare set up at those -6 values, and then getting the percussion, for example, at -9 is usually where it ends up for me. And then getting the basses to hit at that same -6 value so that when your kick hits, it's sidechaining the basses out completely. And then when the basses come in, they're hitting at that same maximum volume that the kick is hitting at. So you don't have to compress the end result of your track basically at all because you have the kick, which is at -6, the bass, which is at -6. And when the transient of the kick hits, the bass isn't playing at all. Like I do really hard short side chains on my snares and kicks. So then when you have all the gain staging right, it means that your master track hits at -6 every time, no problem.
There you go. So actually, let's talk about your mastering process for a second. So you're saying as a result of your fastidious gain staging that the output of your pre-master is pretty much going to be even. Like
Hmm.
the dynamic range is not going to be too crazy because you've leveled it all such a way and you sidechain stuff that like
Hmm.
all the loud elements. There's only really ever one really loud element happening at once.
Exactly.
So
So it
like
never stacks.
exactly. So having done that, like so you mentioned FabFilter Pro L as like
Hmm.
your mastering kind of element, and so you basically just turn it up until it's at 0 dB and you're done. Like that pretty much
More
what
than
happens.
that. I mean, because the nice thing about having such a dramatic side chain, so let's say kick is at -6, basses are at -6. They never overlap. That means the overall master is at -6 every time. And then you can kind of boost it. Like I generally boost it, I want to say by 12 decibels. So it's being slammed 6 dB into the limiter, but it doesn't seem to clip or distort very much. Like for example, the Savant the remix competition that I did where I won with that,
Mm.
that's just fucking I think it's like boosted 16 decibels into a limiter, something like that, where it's just slammed into it for loudness.
And so like how short a release do you usually put on like limiters for stuff like that?
Short release, short attack, just kind of making it really punchy, quick.
Just shy of like being actual distortion.
Yeah, I mean, it might be distorting. I don't know. For all I know, that track is distorting, but it sounded fine to
Yeah,
me, so I went with it.
I am particularly a fan of saturating on masters for that for pretty
Hmm.
much that same reason. Like I like the crunchy punchy that comes out of it. And for people who are watching that might be confused by doing that, the reason why this works by saturating the master is that saturation or distortion in general, digitally, what it's doing is that it adds higher harmonics to the original sound. Like if you want to get real base level technical about it. So like if you have a sound that has a lot of high frequency activity in it already, then it's kind of hard to notice any additional like excitement in it. Although
Hmm.
it's not completely unnoticeable, but it's not so damaging that you're like, oh, I don't want that. So again, it can sound better. That's why that
Right,
kind of stuff
exactly.
works.
And for example, like with Bittersweet, I didn't slam that song specifically into a limiter as much just because It's more melodic. It doesn't have to have those really huge like it doesn't have to be as loud.
Mm. See, the difference
So,
between you and me is that like you make sure you handle your dynamic range like compression basically manually with your gain staging, where you do the
mhm.
really hardcore epic side chaining and like the even level like basses and stuff like that. Whereas I handle it by really not giving a shit about my gain staging and just compressing the hell out of it with multi-band compressors galore on the master chain. Which like
Mhm.
I actually that track that I sent you earlier today, which no one has seen yet, was like the first time where I didn't really do that. Where I actually did kind of like gain stage the drums a bit. Like normally I compress stuff before it even goes to the master. Like I'll do a bus compressor on the drums like really hard, that kind of thing. I didn't even do it because
Mhm.
like it ended up hitting with that kind of like punching clarity, and there's not a lot going on in that track. There's just lots of basses and like one or two like high range elements in there. So much like your style that you were just mentioning, like it had only one or two loud elements ever happening at a time, and it was very interesting, kind of living in that world.
Right on.
Indeed.
Yeah,
So
I
is there
think
anything
that
else?
I do a lot of compression, but it's mostly on groups. So it's like
Hmm.
in Ableton, and I think the way you would do this in FL is with sends. But on Ableton, you can kind of like take a set of columns. Like for example, if I have like percussion, drum loop, hats, ride cymbals, Foley, and I like group those all together, I can make one group that's just like the percussion group, and then I can do parallel compression on that so that that level stays constant, and that helps with gain staging too, is just like compressing the group. So you can know, for example, I want my percussion group to hit at -9. If you compress it, it's much easier for that to actually happen.
Yeah, for it to stay there like that. Someone asked repeatedly, how long did it take you to make your remix of "This Is How I Roll," and why did you decide to participate in the competition?
Um, for my remix of This Is How I Roll, it probably took me about a week, and that's like not a week of like studio time. It was like I think 4 different studio sessions, and the first one I just laid out the drums and took like the melody stems from the original and kind of set that up for the first part, and then in the second one, I laid out the composition of the whole track and basically added in the vocals where I wanted them. I hadn't recorded anything yet, so I was just using the vocals from the original song. And then in the third one, I tuned up all the mix down of the like basses and the drops in the drums, got all the gain staging like exactly where I wanted it. And then in the fourth one, I recorded the vocals and got them mixed and sounding pretty much exactly like, well, not exactly, but I tried to mix them to sound similar to the vocals from the original.
Hmm.
And a lot of people didn't realize that I'd re-recorded them, which I think is a good sign
Yeah,
because
it's a
it,
pretty good compliment right there.
yeah, exactly.
That's pretty
So,
cool.
and the reason I decided to participate in it was I've been kind of scoping out Section Z a lot, and they were saying that they kind of liked my work, and I saw that Savant was doing a remix competition. It seemed like a good opportunity. Um, I was expecting actually not to win because I was expecting that because I was already with Section Z that they were going to say, "You're already signed with us. It doesn't make any sense for us to let you win." But I ended up winning the popular vote, which is like I couldn't necessarily, I can't fake that really. I mean, I guess I could have bought votes or something, but the person who did that, who was like right behind me for a while, they suddenly 70 votes disappeared from their page. So it's like,
Ooh, yeah, that does happen. That's a problem. Let's
mhm.
see. Someone said they actually had a base sound design question about your remix of Antithesis, and someone else has asked about the remix of Antithesis.
Mhm.
So, it kind of in general, like, how do you approach bass sound design, just sort of in general?
I would say, well, it's a little weird because Antithesis, that remix at this point, I think is over a year old. So it's very different what I was doing then to what I'm doing now. That Antithesis remix is still a massive patch. So it's just one macro routed to like a shitload of different parameters in massive, which is same thing Joe Ford does. I think he still works in MIDI and has macros for all sorts of different stuff in massive.
Mm.
So that's how I did that one. But what I do now is I just made a patch yesterday. So generally what I do is I go into operator set up my different FM waveforms, start modulating the volume of each of them to get all these sort of like weird harmonic interplay. And they almost sound like wobbles because you're like phasing up the harmonics of like the next FM oscillator in the chain. And then I accent that with my like resonant low pass filter that makes them actually wobbles. And then I compress that up so it's all sort of like multi-band even across the spectrum. And then keep doing that over and over again. Use EQ to flatten out the spectrum. Eventually layer, like for example, if the bass I make is an E, I layer at the very end a sub in E underneath it and high pass the original and include the sub and then save that as a like a sampler patch. So anytime I'm actually in a song working on it, all I do is I just grab a sampler patch from my Ableton preset bank, load it up, and start affecting it.
So, do you often are the songs that you use in songs that you like produce like I mean this is kind of a weird question, but like when do you ever make songs that or sounds that are specific for songs? Or are they all just stuff that you've made before that you pick up and use?
Um, well, I mean, to be more transparent, it's like I think I have at the moment, including the one I made yesterday, I have three patches total. So like all
Wow,
of the songs I've made between, I want to say the collective and now have been those three patches.
that's pretty impressive. You get a lot of
So
versatility out of that.
yeah, exactly. It's like how you affect it in sampler. It's how you use like I said, Ableton's routing allows for all sorts of cool stuff.
That is cool. That is indeed. Someone keeps asking if I use Toxic, and I don't. Everything Toxic can do, Citrus can do better.
Boom.
That's all there is to that. It's actually the same. That's more or less true for just about every FM synth I've ever used. I have not actually used Ableton's operator or anything related to that, and I've heard good things.
From what I can
Obviously,
tell, they're pretty similar.
yeah. Like, I mean, one day I'll use it. I'll find out. But I do most of my FM stuff with Citrus and such. Let's see. Uh, I don't know if that's an actual question that person asked about a
The
remix.
Dick Room remix?
Yeah.
No. I think it's funny. I think it's cool. I actually really like that Section Z is doing that, but it's like it doesn't really fit with what I'm trying to do.
I don't really do remix myself. I'm not big on remix competitions. I did the Black Sun Empire one because I felt like that like Noisia and Black Sun Empire are like so in my roots as a producer that like I had to. I felt like
Right.
it was like necessary.
I've
And
done two recently, and I ended up winning both of them, which I was pretty thrilled about. But I don't necessarily know that I want to do more of them
the one I did
because
before
it's
that
just like,
was a Skrillex one, and that ended up weird. So
mhm,
that got odd. It's not that kind of thing.
right.
Seamless X Evoke collab.
Yes.
Why not?
Yes.
We should.
Let's do it.
Yeah. It'll have to be released on Fixed. Is the only thing about
I'll forgive you someday.
that. Very good. We'll make something nuts. It'll be good. Um. Let's see. Any snare sound? We just already talked about snares, FM basses. Lol, Skrillex. I mean, you can laugh at Skrillex as much as you want, but the dude could do good stuff. Like as a producer, I mean, I might not necessarily agree with some of his decisions in Recess, the album. What makes a song neuropop?
Uh,
We kind of already sort of answered that, but
I can't remember if we answered that before the stream started.
it was one of the first questions when we started recording was
All right.
what was neuropop? Well, like,
It's just like for
Tasha
me, it's
Baxter
just like
here.
a tag that works to describe everything that I do. You know, it's like I sing, I songwrite, I make basses, and like it's probably the least restrictive tag I've ever been able to like come up with because it's like it doesn't have BPM restrictions. It doesn't have someone's gonna be like that's not neuropop.
Yeah.
No one's gonna say that because no one knows what it even like. Obviously, the fact that you're asking the question means like it basically is an excuse to do whatever the fuck I want. For being honest.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of how I use the term bass music. Like, it'd be kind of, which is it? I can say words. I promise. I can speak.
You got this.
I've gone to school, you guys. I've learned how to talk. But what I was gonna say was that like bass music is also like it would actually like restrict what you do, just because your songs are so vocal heavy that like it's not something that you would expect out of like a neuro even like a regular neuro track or like a bass music track, unless we talk about like we talk like some random vocals and like a breakdown or something. Like you have it like in your drop, like in your main part of your tracks, you have vocals, and that's like that's pretty ballsy, I have to say. Like, because when people think of neuro and they think of bass music and they think of like the kind of like cone sounding stuff that you make, that like that wouldn't work. That like it would just detract from it. But you managed to find a way to make it merge, which is very cool, I have to say. I enjoy that a lot. Okay, so thank God we have the internet. Something about massive. What are some things you'd focus on in creating clean basses?
Ah, that's a very good question. The main thing is keeping the low end out of the effects processing. So for me, like generally what I've been doing a lot recently is I know a lot of people know of sine compression. I think Frequent talks about it a bit. He's planning on doing a video tutorial for it soon. I think he does it differently than I do because that's almost always the case. But basically what I do is I just like take a sine wave and then detune something very slightly again to get it like a really subtle Reese. And then I split it into low end and everything above low end, which I guess would be high end, but it's not specific. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I like take the high end and I just keep compressing it over and over and over and over and over again until it distorts using like glue compressor, sausage fattener, multiband compression. I just keep compressing it over and over and over again. And that's how, like, for example, in Big Fish, Little City, that's what that is.
So okay, sine compression. That was an interesting term. Like when I first heard about that, it was actually from people in streams like this. Like asking me if I knew how to could do a tutorial on sine compression. That's something I never heard of, and
Right.
I've had like Frequent had explained it in some videos and stuff. And like my primary question with it, the idea of taking like splitting up like the sine wave on the high and then compressing it a whole bunch of times. How like is that different than just distorting it? Like rather
Um,
straight up for real?
it's not really different than distorting it. What I like specifically about it is that it's just the style of distortion it is. You know what I mean? It's just the specific harmonics that you get out of slamming something into a limiter. It's kind of like you were saying. It ends up being saturation,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, I guess that's true. I'll have to try something more specific about that. I'll be interested in seeing a more modern tutorial about that from either you or Frequent. The someone had mentioned something. I keep saying things that I want to ask you, then I keep forgetting about it because I'm not paying attention.
Just really quick while you're looking, I do not use Nexus 2. I don't think it's a good idea to use a synth that will not let you access the waveforms.
Here. Someone's asking me a question. Do I compress? Also, do Evoke multiband compress?
I use an absurd amount of multiband. I use an absurd amount of compressors in general.
Me too.
I have a friend who was asking me to come over and help him with mix down on this thing. And he was like, "You realize you've put 18 compressors on my song so far in different places." So basically, like, what it generally ends up being is I'll have like the bass itself, which has already been compressed every time I do a resampling cycle, at least twice. And then that's put into a sampler patch, which then gets compressed. And then that goes into the bass group, which is on a parallel compressor. And then that goes into my multiband compressor to level out the low, middle, and high end. But never compress the low end on a multiband compressor, ever, on a bass track. It just squares off the sine wave, and you end up with less movement.
So you do separate low end reinforcement through like sine waves and stuff.
No, I just what I was saying is I load the sine into the thing before I load it up into sampler. So I always
Oh,
have the pure sine wave at the bottom in sampler,
okay.
and then in my experience, it doesn't really get messed up by the compression
Yeah, at that point,
as
because
long as you're
as you
doing
said,
like either parallel or multiband, but that's not compressing the low end.
like I think it's funny that like there's kind of like a producer meme that goes around just being like compress 8 times, bro, where like that's they're joking, but that's what happens. Like that
Right.
if you like trace the origin of a sound to the completion of a track, it's probably been compressed at least 8 times. Like most of them less so, but like as a whole, it's a thing that happens. And it's not like we're running everything redlining it the whole time every time, but like it gets a little silly. Um, God
Hi,
damn.
Ian.
Hi, Ian. Someone
I
say
went to
Ian.
his house and put 18 compressors on his song, and then he didn't
Oh,
use my snare, and I was furious. So we're not friends anymore.
Should have used the snare, man.
I know, that's a dick move.
Dick move, guys. Okay, so people kept asking about granular synths, and I know that there's something in Ableton that does kind of what the food granulizer does. I mean, in general, granulizing is kind of a common process. Do you do that
Mhm.
a lot? Do you use
Nope.
None? Really?
No, not even a little bit.
Huh.
The main thing that bothers me about granular is that it messes up the low end. So what I
It
was
does
saying
do
is
that.
like you never want to like fuck with a sine wave. And like if you're granulating a bass, you like take the sine wave and then you split it right here, and then it like snaps to another weird point, and then it starts going up this way, and you split it again, and you do that so many times that you don't end up with a sine wave in your low end at all.
That is definitely true. That's actually like a pretty common problem that I run into because I do that, and that's pretty much what happens. And like, especially because it's like the ideal solution to that would be to like high pass it and then put another sine wave on it. But you're probably not gonna find the right, like, unless it's all one note. Like if it moves around at all a pitch, you're probably not gonna find the correct
Mhm.
reinforcement to follow it, and
The
that can be
only,
kind of a
I
pain.
guess the only way I would use granular would be like really early on in the resampling process because I hate trying to use a sub at the end. I would rather have the sub just be in the low end. Like people always say like, "Oh, your subs match up so nicely with your designs." That's because I'd never have a separate sub. It's like it's always part of the sampler patch.
It's just
So the
involved
only
in
way
there.
I could make it work would be to granulate it right before the sampler patch, and then at that point, why am I even doing that? Like,
Mm.
what would be the point of it?
Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with granulizing, like a lot of neat effects, but like for the reasons that you described, like it can get kind of unwieldy. It's mostly like it's mostly good for like fill kind of stuff, like bass fills,
Mhm.
stuff that aren't the main focus, not the main following driving force of the song, for all of those reasons.
Right.
Like like I don't know, I just feel like saying like, because I thought I had something else I was gonna say, but I guess not. Uh, let's see, Evoke. Do you use anything specific for resynthesis?
Well, as I kind of mentioned earlier, I really like, for example, I guess for my last four songs, I haven't used anything that is not an Ableton stock plugin. So uh, basically, it's just audio, and then I have operator, and I compress the shit out of that, EQ it a lot, low pass it, compress it again, resample that, uh, low pass it, modulate that, compress it again, resample it, EQ out all the different weird peaks, compress it, resample it again, add a sub, load it up into sampler, and that's my patch.
Okay. So we I think we talked about this before. I don't know if we talked about this when we actually started recording, but you had mentioned that you have a guitar and that you use that
I do.
as like your primary like songwriting kind of thing.
hmm
So explain how that works.
Well, I have actually two different kind of things that I do, and one of them is that I have MIDI pickups on my guitar. So a lot of the time, what I'll do is I will just like play chords on a guitar if I'm starting to write something because, a lot of the times I like to come at it more from the songwriting aspect than from the production aspect. And then when I get something that's like a set of chords that I really like, I'll set up my Fishman triple play MIDI pickups and then just plug it into USB, load up it lags a little bit, but I can just quantize it back into place. And then I just play the chords that I want over the beat that I've got going and viola. That's good to go.
That is pretty interesting. Do you ever have like like straight guitar recordings on tracks?
Sometimes, especially on my new album with Section Z, it's like I have a lot of guitar stuff on there as sort of backing instruments. Like, and the collab with Laura Brem that I'm doing has a lot of guitar elements because she also plays guitar.
Cool. So actually, you pointed out to me before we started the stream the track that has a lot of metal stuff going on in it.
hmm
And what's like your guitar effects chain for stuff like that when you want to make like a metal tone?
Um, Guitar rig presets. That's it, really. Guitar rig presets. Sometimes Ableton has a nice cabinet that, like, one thing I noticed with, especially if you're recording guitar, like if I'm using this mic to record the output from an amp or record an acoustic or something, the high end can be really pingy and
Mm,
plucky and ticky and sort of like just harsh. And the cabinet is great for just like still having high end, but it doesn't sound like it's there.
I know that feel. So, do you do much EQ modulation, like on like to make like interesting neuro sounds?
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Um, like I said, mostly what I do now is FM modulation. That's kind of my whole spiel at this point is just like in operator doing FM modulation and then low pass compress back up is the sort of main thing.
Neat. I mean, that does actually give me some cool ideas because I actually don't really use a lot of FM in regards to neuro directly. Like I use it a lot for some standard like dubsteppy style like growl basses, which are fun. And
Do me a solid.
but
When you're in Citrus next time, have your basic wave be a sine wave, modulate it with a saw, and then modulate the saw with a triangle. And just modulate the volumes on the saw and the triangle, and you'll start to hear like the exact tone that I get from most of my neurobasses.
that's very interesting. That okay, I'm gonna try that. Like that's gonna be, you know what? I'm gonna try that right now. That's what's gonna happen. You give me this direction, and I'm gonna do it. And let's see.
Game time.
Game time.
Go
People aren't really
now.
gonna. All right.
I don't have Citrus in Ableton. I use Operator.
Okay, I'm not gonna put the FL up there because that's where the chat is. Hello, chat. Okay, so we're kind of just gonna hear it. We're not really gonna see anything because I don't want to mess up the nice little scene I got set up in XSplit. All right, so I got Citrus. I'm gonna go. All right, I got all sine waves. I'm doing bass.
You got this. Play a really low note. Play like the lowest sub. Like play an E0.
This is E1, I guess, and that'd be E0.
I don't know. It's probably different in FL.
Well, I have okay. It's that's E1. It's the right register. It's the E bass. So you
The
want
lowest that you would go with an E.
Yeah.
I can't tell.
Can you
What
hear
is
that?
frequency modulation? Because it's modulating the frequency, but you're modulating the extent to which it's modulating the frequency.
All right. So you want me to modulate the sine wave by a saw wave,
Yes.
and then modulate the saw wave by a triangle wave.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Not that high. Really low.
Not that. I can kind of see where you're going with this.
Yeah, and you kind of like you have sine wave and that's staying constant, and then you have the saw wave kind of like the volume on it fluxing up and down, and then you have the triangle also fluxing up and down. So the only thing you're modulating are the volume or like I guess amount of modulation of the two
Yeah.
things.
Quite. So actually, I could do this pretty easily. Let's see this volume. I'm gonna get volume of the saw wave mod X and the volume of triangle mod Y. I could just kind of dick around.
Yep, there it is.
I could like change the pitch of one. Yeah, it's a very cool idea.
Ta-da. And
Nice.
that's how I make 100% of my things. And then if you were to low pass that and do all sorts of crazy routing on it, you'd end up with my basses.
Well, I'm gonna try that later. I have learned something, ladies and gentlemen.
Victory.
Yeah. Okay. So I have your YouTube channel up under your name under your face there to kind of link people. And you mentioned earlier that you do like tutorials and stuff.
I do. So a lot of the stuff that I've explained, for example, like dipping down frequency peaks on an EQ or multiband compression or frequency splitting or the filter that I talked about earlier, which has the modulating cutoff, a lot of it is explained on my YouTube tutorials, which I have not uploaded one in a while, but I will be uploading more soon. Now that I've got my album almost ready, it will be very easy for me to start working on those again.
Nice. I look forward to those. Maybe I can learn how to use Ableton.
It'll be exciting. And then I actually have watched a lot of your tutorials. I don't even know why, because I haven't used FL in a very long time, but I feel like I've learned a lot. I'm jealous of the vocoder in FL. I will say that. And I'm on Mac, so it's unusable for me.
Yes, that's kind of a bummer. They are working on making native Mac versions of the plugins. I know that they're working on all the goal-based ones, which are Harmor, Maximus, Citrus, Vocodex, and some other ones. So like eventually those will be things that work. And I was gonna say something relevant about something. It was useful. It was full of good stuff. Someone asked if I could ghost produce for them, and no. Well, oh yeah, I was gonna say. Someone actually used they used Ableton's vocoder to recreate the first of the year by Skrillex, and like they did it. Like they used FMA and they made an vocoder with Ableton's vocoder, and like it worked. They did a good job.
Hi, Tasha Baxter. Sorry. Hi, Tasha Baxter. She wanted me to say hi, so I'm saying hi. Hello. She is great. But
Tasha
sorry,
Baxter's
you were
pretty good.
talking. I don't like using vocoders.
No.
It's one of those things where like I don't use vocoders, I don't use chorus, phasers, flangers. I don't use any of that stuff. So because I don't know what it does, which I guess is probably more on me than anything. But I feel like it's really hard for me to like actively control exactly what a chorus is doing.
Well,
And for me,
yeah.
I like to control exactly what exactly how the frequency is being modulated, exactly how everything's working. I like to have really exact control over it.
I know that feeling. Like I've tried like a lot of my production career has been trying to figure out what stuff does so that I even know what I'm doing. Especially because if I do something by accident, I want to know how to like recreate it later. That's kind of a big deal.
Totally.
But like especially for like uh Muzzy's calling. Should we answer it?
I don't know who that is.
You know who Muzzy is? He's a
Nope.
Monster Cat artist. It's pretty cool.
Oh, okay.
Why not? Let's do that.
Hey, buddy.
Hi Muzzy.
How you doing, man?
Oh, you're not even on the call. Can I just drag you into it? All right, there you go. Now you're on the call. Is everyone still here?
I am, I think.
Muzzy?
Yes.
Hello? Okay, this was a failed experiment. Sorry, Muzzy.
It's a solid effort. To answer your question, Muzzy. Yes.
Hello.
What? Oh, he's back.
Welcome
Hey,
back.
guys.
Hi.
How's it going?
Hi, Muzzy.
Just a word of warning. I'm currently live streaming. I only rang Steven to ask a question.
What?
We're also live streaming.
Yeah, I don't know. Basically, I just wanted to ask something. People want to see my computer screen. And I don't know how to do that without like screwing up my webcam.
Well, that kind of depends on a whole lot of stuff. But
Oh, really?
I will help you with that.
Way to do it.
I'll help you with that in like 10 minutes when I'm done with my live stream.
Are you doing a live stream at the moment?
Yes. That's why I thought you were calling.
Two live streams going on right now.
It's very meta.
So popular.
We're very
Hang
meta.
on, let me turn on my. Hang on.
Are
Hey
you
guys.
You're kind of in the camera. Like there you are. That's Muzzy.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, Muzzy.
But yeah, look what I got, Seamless.
Oh my God.
It's a Gibson. Les Paul.
We just crossed the streams. That's awesome.
No one. Don't cross the streams. That's good. That's gonna be the title of this live stream now. I'm gonna put
It's
it.
got 3 pickups, and I'm just currently doing to play guitar at all. Like I know, like zero. Like I'm just playing like stuff like that.
Well,
I just tuned it to the second, fifth, and yeah.
awesome. Well, I'll talk to you when we're done with our stream in a second, Muzzy.
That's okay. Have fun, guys.
Bye, Muzzy.
Later.
Nice to meet you.
Bye.
All right, that was cool.
That was really uncomfortable, but in the best possible way.
Yeah, how do I get people out of a call? Cause like I just want to have your. I just do that, I guess. Whatever, that's fine. Okay. Wow, that was unexpected.
Plot twist.
Quite.
We
Oh,
crossed
hey,
the streams.
There we go. That's better. Get rid of that, and now you're back. Good.
And I'm back.
What the hell was I even talking? Okay,
Hello.
we were talking about EQ modulation and oh yeah, choruses and stuff. So, you pretty much accomplish what all that stuff does anyway, just with regular neuro stuff. And like, because like I mean, all a vocoder is gonna really do is like do EQ modulation according to another input. Like that's pretty much it. And like you don't like I haven't really ever gotten a vocoder to do good like what I would refer to as neuro based stuff. It does really good like monstery dubstep stuff, but not super great at like regular neuro business. So like you're not really missing a whole lot. And the same deal with choruses and flangers. Like that's basically just another way to apply like unison and like Reese stuff.
Yeah, basically. I would say that, like I said, I don't experiment with a lot of stuff. I like to know exactly what I'm doing. And as I said, I have 3 patches that I've used for the past like 15, 20 songs. Except for in the collab with Pusher. What I did in that one was I took like an 808 trap kick and then I did sine compression on that. So I had like the kick and then in the high end of that kick, I just had compressor after compressor after compressor all in a macro. So I would turn the macro and it all
Hmm.
would get super distorted.
That's a bit of old school and a bit of new school. So here's a question: what do you think of Big Room?
I think it's really well produced. I think it's really uninspired, and I wish it weren't because I see actually a lot of potential for it as a genre. I think that it gets a lot of hate because it's basically just sub kick with reverb bleed. But if it wasn't the same reverb bleed and there was maybe some edits or some sort of, there's a lot of potential for it, but it's just not being used.
See, Feed Me did a Big Room track that I thought was pretty good, mostly because he utilized that kind of potential. Like, I suppose if I asked the question should not have been like, well, how do you think of Big Room, but more, what do you think of like Big Room's popularity? The fact that that kind of stuff that like I didn't really have a problem with like minimal techno. Like when I was, as I guess it's still a thing, but like I didn't have a problem with it because like that's what it's for. It's designed to do that. But like Big Room, like the first time I ever heard Big Room, it was a Knife Party track. I had yet to hear Martin
Yeah, I
Garrix.
know which song you're talking about because I had the
Exactly.
same
And like
experience.
I started listening to it, I'm like, yeah, this is Knife Party. It's gonna be good. And like, there's a build up, and then the drop happens, and it's like, what just happened?
Yeah, I think there's some quote. I want to say it's from Madeon, but that might be wrong. But it says anyone who hates an entire genre of music generally doesn't enjoy or doesn't understand the context in which it's meant to be enjoyed. And what I will say about Big Room is that it is like absolutely scientifically the most easily acceptable music at a club because it's always going to come through nicely on the sub system because there's not much going on in the low end. It's always going to be really loud because there's not many elements. So when you compress it, it's very loud. And it's not based on a lot of complex things. So anyone can listen to it, have that simple rhythm that drives it, and like dance at a show, like at a huge warehouse rave. So I understand the context of it, and really it is basically like the most scientific like approach to dance music that is possible. And I think it's not like sustainable. I think it's going to die out. I think that because there's not much depth to it that it's going to fall off. But I think that it makes sense to me that it is popular because it's
Okay.
scientifically like same thing with trap. The reason it sounds so huge is because there's so few elements and one of them is that huge very simple sub.
Someone's asking me if I can make a studio tour, and that's not what's happening right now. I might do it later. There's not a lot to see. You can kind of see it on my camera right now, and I have a picture of it up on my Facebook. So if you do a little bit of sleuthing, you can kind of create your own in your mind. But I guess you're right about that. Like I mostly just like dislike it from like a sound design perspective. And I probably wouldn't if it weren't for the fact that people keep asking me to make Big Room. Although I have to like now that you said what you said, they're probably asking me to do something good with it. They're
Right.
probably wanting me to like, but maybe if
We should make our collab a big room track and just be like, fuck all. Just
right,
make it like deceptively good.
deceptively good. I like that. That's good. It's very dangerously close to being actually what we do. M808. On tips and tricks on drums D&B. Thanks, guys. We did kind of discover a whole lot of that.
Yeah, drums are a little bit weird. As I said with earlier, gain staging and grouping is very important. So like I have my percussion group as an entire group, and then I have my kick and snare separate from that. So I have the 2 groups, and I sidechain actually my percussion to my snare so that the combined signal doesn't exceed the 6 dB limit that I set for my drum group.
Hmm.
And in the percussion group, I have everything sort of separately. I generally have at least one like old school breakbeat loop in the background just to have the roominess. And then I will layer like the main thing is having good samples, but layering like quick short hi-hats from like a neurofunk kit, ride cymbals, all sorts of stuff. The main thing is like getting good samples, which I think it's like, let me try and find. I have this. I won't be able to post the link in the stream, but maybe I'll do it right after we're done. It's like a sample search that will search for royalty-free samples on the internet, and you can just download them. I think it searches free sound and SoundCloud, and it's basically just a search engine for royalty-free stuff.
That's cool. That is neat. Well, like, I definitely agree with the idea that like the secret to the good drums is to start with the good drums. Like it's not even like I tried to create my own drums once, like from scratch, and it's not a good time. Like beyond like going in the other room and getting a drum kit and like sampling a kit and then like compressing the shit out of it. Like it's not something that I'm really good at. And like at this time and like and like EDM productions being like such a popular thing, like the internet is just awash with all kinds of like totally fine samples. Like he was just saying,
Right.
that there being a search engine designed to scrape all the places you'll find everything you can possibly get.
Right. And if you're looking, like, I do buy samples. Like, I go to like loopmasters.com and buy a sample pack every now and again just to make it, just to have a new set of sounds to inspire me. And probably the best investment that Spectric and I ever made was, I think they're called Black Octopus Monster Kicks. It is like I'm actually going to type that out in the stream real quick because it's like the best collection of kick drums that I have ever had.
Yes. Black
And it's
Octopus
like
is
15
pretty good.
bucks. It's like not very much.
Yeah. Black Octopus also has a bunch of neat sample packs for stuff. Not the least of which being one of mine. That is a bunch of neuro bases. But there's actually a neuro, like a not a neuro pack, like a glitch hop pack. It's got a bunch of like loops and breaks and stuff, and it's kind of cool. I was gonna mention something about not about drums or basses. Oh yeah, okay. Someone actually wanted to ask, what's your opinion on like going forward with like music education to learn how to do this stuff? Like, were you ever taught like what you know, or did you like learn it yourself?
I kind of learned myself. I got into music production. I was actually like super geeky as a kid, and I was really into Guitar Hero. And eventually it came up like, why are you spending so much time playing that game? Get a real guitar. So I got a real guitar, and then my brother needed music for his video games, so I was able to transcribe from guitar tablature into MIDI. There was a program that I had that did that. And then that program that did that had VST support. So I just kept adding on VSTs and shit over and over and over again. And then eventually upgraded to FL Studio, and then eventually made the switch to Ableton, which I'm personally glad I did, but that's not to say anything bad about FL Studio.
Certainly.
But I would say that in learning in that like bizarrely specific, non-linear, non-educationally centered way, I was able to learn to do things very oddly. But also, I did have some instruction specifically on sound design from Dirk Kuistra and Frequent. So I learned a lot of the actual technical stuff from them. And then Cursa actually taught me a lot of the stuff I know now about mixdowns. So it's just about like finding people and knowing the right question to ask. So I would say like investing time into actually learning melodies, composition, bigger picture stuff, and like familiarizing yourself with the layout of your DAW. Like, don't waste time in school doing that. You're going to pay too much money to become familiar with the layout of a program. But I would say when it comes down to like mixing, mastering, sound design, invest in something independent. Like Frequent does sound design tutorials. I highly recommend them. They're not that expensive. Dirk Kuistra does sound design tutorials. Again, highly recommended. That's where I learned almost everything I know. And then I personally take students. If you wanted to hit me up about that, feel free to just email me, evokehop@gmail.com. So just go independent with it so you're not spending tens of thousands of dollars to A, learn to familiarize yourself with a DAW, and B, I don't know,
Yeah,
just
a lot of
not
the
learn stuff.
information. Yeah, a lot of the information that you'll get, like for sound, like sound design especially, it's like it's not even really that you need to learn like these techniques and stuff. It's just like the names of things that you know that you want to do that you don't know what they are, and like being told that stuff does not take a long time. It doesn't take a long time for someone to explain how a Reese is made, and then you can extrapolate that into like a whole universe worth of sound. Like it's super duper not worth like going to a college for that kind of stuff. Also because most
Just,
colleges don't do it.
do we have enough time for me to answer this? If can you talk about neural hop arrangement? Can I just like
Sure, but I don't mind going over.
Cool. So, neural hop arrangement, the main thing that I did to get started with it was like loading up a breakbeat basically, and then if you listen, like you can hear the kicks and it's like boom, ka, boom, boom, ka. If you layer MIDI kicks on top of the breaks and then layer basses on top of each of the kicks, you can kind of start like thinking of the kick and the bass as one cohesive unit, and that starts to give you a feel for like that hip hop groove that kind of is inherent in a nice breakbeat sample. So you can kind of like start extracting the groove from the drum loop and then using the basses as kicks in addition to your actual kick sample. So that's a good way to get started. And then beyond that, it's just you'll start to get a feel after doing that for a long enough time for like what the breakbeat like groove is like. So you can kind of like start hearing it already in your head without having to load up a drum loop.
Well, just for arrangement in general, one thing I like to do, I mean, really all of it comes down to is that if you think it like flows well, and it's important to maintain the flow, and it's really easy to know when it doesn't flow. Like it's really easy to listen to something and just be, and like you get into it, and then like something happens that like throws you out of like being into it, and like it could be hard. It could be hard. You know when it happens, but you might not necessarily know precisely what and why. And one way that I've noticed that you can do that, but you can do it, is that you listen, you put the song on or your part on or whatever, and then you don't pay attention to it. Like go like read something online or something, and like you're gonna hear it in your background. And if something happens in the track that throws you out of the groove, it will bring you back to it. Like it'll pull you out of whatever you're looking at, and your brain will be like, oh, whatever just happened just then, that's not supposed to happen. Like that,
Right.
that, and then you'll have a better understanding for it because like your brain. You won't, because if you're like trying to pay attention to it, if you're looking at the track and just being like, okay, what's wrong with it, and you're looking at it, your brain's thinking of a whole lot of stuff that's about in the track. But if you're not thinking about it and you hear the thing that happens, your brain's gonna focus only on that one thing that happened. It'll be more clear.
Right.
Indeed. So we're about done. We've been doing this for about an hour. The recording of this will end up being on YouTube, and I got Evoke's YouTube link up on the screen here that you can see it. Come back next week. We'll have Zardonic on the stream. It'll be very good.
Thanks for having me, dude.
Indeed. If anyone has any questions about this, let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.